can do that one. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Actually, when Tim first phoned me and said, "Would you like to speak at Holly Lodge?" my first thought was, no, I can't possibly do that. I haven't done anything like this for ages, for years and years and years. And to tell you the truth, the last year has been the most chaotic, challenging year of my life. I think it's been quite a challenging life anyway, but the last year has been particularly challenging, and I did not feel able to take up another challenge. But you know, when you get that feeling that God wants you to do something, and you really don't want to do it, but but you know it's of God, and you know that you or other people are going to miss out if you don't do it, so you do it. So I really felt that God wanted me to do this. So hopefully he will speak something, if I can find the right paper and place. So yeah, I first knew Tim and Julie a long, long time ago. We've just been thinking 40 years. I can't possibly be 40 years. I'm not that old. When we were at Zor, I'd been a Christian for maybe a year, 2 years, and yeah, we came into membership together, didn't we? And while I was at Zor, just a very young Christian, I felt that God wanted me to go to the mission field. And I said, no, can't do that. I'm good. But again, it's when God really puts something on your heart, you know you have to. Do you have to do it? Does God order us, or does God invite us? Tim mentioned that the theme for that you're covering this period is taking up the invitation. And when God puts something on your heart, it isn't an order, is it? It's an invitation. If you don't do what God asks you, are you going to lose your salvation? Is God going to abandon you? No, he isn't, is he? You lose something, you miss out on something, you know, but God invites us. His invitation is to come and follow me. Come unto me. And when we take up that invitation, we are blessed. We can often meet up with lots and lots of challenges as well. In fact, we will. You know, if we follow Jesus, we take up that invitation to follow Jesus, you are going to have challenges in your life. You're going to have big challenges in your life. You might have challenges anyway, but you know what? I think sometimes you have bigger challenges when you're a Christian because the enemy doesn't like that. You know, but Jesus is bigger, and he is there with us. And that's really what I want to stress today, is that, you know, we are more than conquerors through Jesus. You know, he calls us to be victors, not victims. You know, and this last year, amongst my children, I've had, you know, this one's the beginning of last year, this one suddenly started having seizures. Now, I had never seen a seizure in my life, and that was the scariest thing I've ever seen. And she had them one after the other. And when I took her to the doctors, well, we went to the hospital lots of times, and eventually a neurologist told me that she needed to have this medication. And she said, if you give her this medication, it will stop the seizures, but it might challenge her cognitively. Well, this one is already quite seriously challenged cognitively. And she was making progress. She's beginning to say words. She's 10 years old. But she's functioning more like a 1 or 2 year old. But she's making progress in her way. And, you know, the medication might challenge her cognitively. Step back. Oh, I don't know if I can But God made very clear to give her the medication. And actually, since having the medication, she hasn't had any seizures, and she's not stepped back cognitively. She has made progress cognitively. So, we need, in all these things, in all the challenges and burdens that we have, we need to trust God and trust what He's leading us to, and see Him. Sometimes the victory is fast, or it's easy to see and clear immediately, or in the short time. Sometimes it takes years and years. The story that really strikes me one of the stories that really strikes me in the Bible is the story of Joseph. Joseph was loved by God, wasn't he? We were all loved by God, but Joseph was. God had a plan and a purpose for his life. And yet his brothers tried to kill him, put him in the pit, sold him into slavery. He ended up falsely accused and in prison. And even when you saw him telling of the dreams of the other two prisoners, and God giving him the answer, and it seemed like God had made a way there, but still he had to wait for another 7 years, was it, before he was free. He was in prison for a long, long time. Is that being blessed by God? But within that prison time, he trusted God. He trusted God's faithfulness. And, in the midst of our challenges, and even if they go on a long time, it's so important, isn't it, to hold on to the faithfulness of God, because he will not abandon us. He doesn't promise to take everything away, to take all the troubles away, but he does promise that he will be there with us in them, and that he will lead us through into a victory. The victory might not be quite what we had our idea of the victory, but it's a victory, and we know that God will lead us to something good and something great through our challenges. So when I was back in Zor, in my early 20s, I think, long time ago, God had called me to the mission field, and he'd shown me that I needed to go to Bible college. And before I went to Bible college, I really felt a desperation that I needed to know where I was going on the mission field. God, where do you want me to go? And I sent off for loads of brochures and things. And one Sunday in church, we didn't have a pastor at the time. We had a series of visiting pastors, and this one pastor is a very good speaker, but I was sitting there not listening to him because I was feeling very, very uncomfortable, because I felt God say to me, I felt God say to me that this pastor has something for you. You need to go and ask him what he's got to say to you personally. Now, I'd never experienced that before, and that was scary. Can you imagine doing that? Going up to somebody, oh, God has something for you to say to me. Could you tell me what it is? Well, I was like, I can't do that, God. I've got a lot of can't do's. I can't do that, God. But Jesus said, yeah, you can. And at the end of the service, I kind of went and hovered by this chap, just praying, Lord, this is beyond me. And this pastor, he turned around and he looked at me and said, young lady, God has something to speak to you. If we take the step, God meets us there. He took me into his vestry, and or took me into the the back vestry, and he said, "God's given me a verse for you. See, I set before you an open door which no man can shut." And he said, it's very important for you to hold on to this verse, to know where it is, but I can't remember where it is. He couldn't remember where the verse was. Anybody here know? See, I set before you an open door which no man can shut. It's so important for you to know this. And he prayed for me, and he laid his hands on my head, which I'd never experienced before either. And it was powerful. And then when he finished praying, he said, Revelation 3:8. And sure enough, it's Revelation 3:8. See, I set before you an open door which no man can shut. And he said, hold this on your heart, because God has something to speak to you through this. So I held it on my heart, and a week or two later, continuing just to be desperate before God to know if you want me to go, I'll go. I'll go anywhere you want me, because I know that you have saved me and you love me, and I trust you. I've given my life to you. But I need to know. I just need to know. And I was a couple of Sundays later, I was flicking through piles of brochures that I sent off for, because I was waiting for some spark of inspiration and to know where God was calling me. And just flicking through these brochures and looked down at there was one across this pile. One had fallen open, and it was black and white print, black and white photograph, and in bright red capitals underneath the picture, what do you think it said? See, I set before you an open door which no man can shut. And and that recognition that you have on your heart, I mean, that was pretty dramatic. I need to be spoken to quite clearly, really, to and God, I looked at the brochure, and it was about China. And I think you were around then. There was about 6 weeks where we got, every week there was then a mention of China. I went that very Sunday. I went to the deacons and said, I think I'm being called to China. And I explained. And they said, no, you can't be called to China. China is closed. China is closed. It's closed to foreigners, certainly closed to missionaries. This is a while ago, remember? But God had spoken very clearly to me. And then over the next 6 weeks, every Sunday, something about China came from the pulpit. And one of the deacons said, I think you'd better go, otherwise you're never going to hear any other message. Anyway, so I went to Bible college preparing to go to China, and the lecturers there said, you can't go to China. Maybe Hong Kong. China is a closed door. But by the end of my Bible college training, so I was 3 years in Bible college, and there was beginning to trickle through some teachers going to China. So that's how I went eventually. I went to China as a teacher and was one of the first to go in through that new open door policy, because God had said, see, I set before you an open door which no man can shut. Now, having spent many years, well, not many years, by then it was 5 years since God had 4 years since God had first said that he wanted me to go to China. And when I got to China, it was very, very strict. I was one of 3 foreigners in this city of 4 million. Yeah, so I was very visible. I'd walk down the street and bent down to do my shoelace up, And when I stood up, there's this crowd of people around me. You know, when you moved, have you ever seen that movie, The King and I, where the skirt is people, or the ladies form the big balloon skirt, don't they? And she walks around, and this skirt is kind of moving. Well, these people were like a skirt around me. As I moved, they moved, and you know, I walked down the street with this great crowd. There must have been 100 people around me, you know, and it was. We stuck out like sore thumbs, and you just wished that you could speak the language and preach to them about Jesus, because that's what we were there for, but we weren't allowed to do that. And it was hot, and it was very smelly, and it was very dirty. And I was like, and we weren't allowed to speak about Jesus. And there were times where I felt, Lord, why am I here? But what we can do, of course, is pray and be there as a presence for Jesus. And one of my early groups of students, I had 24 students in my class, and I had to split them into groups of 4. And in one of the groups, they came in groups of 4 to do free talk in my home. And one of the groups, when I asked them, well, what do you want to talk about? This is free talk, it's what you want to talk about. What do you want to talk about? And right early on, this group said, we want to talk about God. Tell us about God. And I'm like, I'm not allowed to tell you about God. I'm not allowed to speak about God. And he said, oh, that's okay. You can, you know, and so I was able to share about God in this group. And it was scary, because it was forbidden in China. And there was a government health warning at the side of my classroom, my blackboard, a little square thing in Chinese, telling the students that they could learn from the foreigner what's necessary, but be careful of anything religious or political, or to be careful what they learnt from these foreigners. One of my early memories of those times were the 3 of us, and the 3 of us who were in that city, the 3 foreigners who were in that city. We lived quite far away from each other, and we met on a Sunday. We would meet to pray and to worship together. And this particular Sunday, we were meeting in my home, and David was one of the other teachers, was very excited because he had a conversation with somebody in the city of 4 million, remember? He'd had a conversation with somebody in the city, a man called Mr. Lee, and he was telling us about how this guy had just come up to him, started talking in English, and wanted to know about God, wanted to know about Jesus. And David was actually able to lead him to the Lord and give him a Bible that he happened to have in his backpack. And his regret was that he didn't have the address or any way of no mobile phones then. I mean, now you just take your mobile phone number, won't you? But no mobile. They didn't even have telephones then. There was one telephone in the city of 4 million. One public phone that was in the post office. 1 or 2 of the richer people would have, or the more, I shouldn't say richer because it's a communist country, but more powerful people would have phones in their homes, but there weren't phones in general. So he had no way of contacting this chap, and we just prayed for him. He hadn't taken his address, not that he could do much with it anyway. Hadn't taken his address or anything. We prayed for this chap, and as we prayed, there was a knock on the door. I lived on the ground floor of some flats out on the outskirts of the city, in an agricultural institute. Knock on the door, and I went to open the door, and this chap came down from upstairs. He was visiting his parents upstairs, and they had dropped a plastic bag over the balcony into my backyard. And plastic bags were very precious then. They didn't have access to them either. And so I led him through to have a look, and David leaps up and says, "Mr. Lee!" And Mr. Lee, "Oh, David!" And, how good is God? How great is God? And that's, this guy's parents. The city of 4 million, what's the likelihood of that? City of 4 million, this guy that he had met, his parents live above me. And then on a weekly basis, we were able to do Bible studies with him. So that was really exciting. So as a teacher, there were many, many opportunities to share about Jesus in class. Now, at first, it was very scary. Later on, it goes in cycles in China. At the moment, they're going through a time of great persecution. But there have been such opportunities to share as a Christian. Later on, I was asked to teach literature and culture, and I was given a video class. I mean, what is video class? But I would use that again to teach literature and culture, because then you can use all sorts of things, can't you, from our culture, from our literature, that speaks about Jesus. And there was one time when I in video class, I would show, at Easter, I would show the video of Jesus, the Jesus movie. Just such a great opportunity to speak to. My classes were my smallest classes were usually 40. That first class was 24, but after that, my classes were usually 40 or 60 or 100. Can you imagine doing conversational English in a class of 100? It wasn't easy. Teaching culture, in a class of 100, without a microphone. So, yeah. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the video class, a movie of the Jesus movie. I was showing my students, and just as I was showing just as the scene of Jesus on the cross came up one time, the president of the university came in with a TV crew, and they were filming the university, because at that time the university, this was quite a long. I'd been in China for quite a long time by then, and there were more foreigners at that university, and they were teaching the foreigners. They were filming the foreign teachers in action, and so they got a film on TV. So I spent so much time expecting the police to be knocking on my door and dragging me out, but God kept me in there, so good. Okay, so during that time of being in China, God made very clear to me that he wanted me to adopt a child, and I'm single. I've always been single. And adopt a child? Well, how do I do that? And I asked my Chinese friends, where would one go to adopt a child? Where are the orphans? Because there must be orphans, because there's a one-child policy. This got me thinking, there must be orphans somewhere. There must be, because China traditionally likes boys. If there's only one child, many of them are going to want a boy. Where is the orphanage? And my students would say, my friends would say, no, China loves its children. We don't have any orphanages, because they don't know. Now, I did find an orphanage. Sorry, sweetie pie. And how do you go about adopting a child? I had no idea. I asked a friend who was a journalist. I thought, well, they might know, because journalists quite often know. So, and I asked her to keep it quiet, not say anything to anybody, but just see if she could find out how you would do that. The next thing I knew, as I was going into my class, I heard a couple of people discussing the foreigner who wanted to adopt a child. So I thought, oh no, that's out now, isn't it? So then I went to the foreign affairs people in the city, and the guy there that I spoke to, he said, right, do you know which one you want? We'll go and get her right now. So, and that just took me a bit by surprise. I was expecting to have to argue it, but I'd been praying about it, and God said to go, so I went. And as he asked me, this picture of I had been visiting the orphanage, and this picture of one of the children in particular just popped into my head, and I really felt that was the child that God would have me adopt. So, cut a long story short, I adopted but I adopted Rebecca, and it took a long, long time, and all through the process, they were saying, it's impossible, you can't do it. But God said, you can do it, and I'm with you. And at first, the child was in the orphanage, and I wanted to take her out, because in that orphanage at the time of there were about 40 children, 40 babies, probably about 50 other children. There were about 40 babies at a time in that in the baby room, and they were very rarely there 3 or 4 weeks running. They would die. So probably at that time there were about 500 babies coming into that orphanage. And how can you choose just one when there are so many? So I had needed God to just make very clear which one. And after about 3 weeks, the foreign affairs chap told the orphanage, keep this baby healthy and well for the foreigner. The foreigner's going to adopt this baby, keep her healthy and well. But after a little while, the baby got sick. She got bronchitis. And the orphanage people got very nervous, because the foreign affairs people are quite high up. And the orphanage people got quite nervous and said, okay, you can take her home and make her well, because we don't, babies, as soon as they get sick, they will die in the orphanage. So I took her home, and she did get well, but there was no way I was going to take her back. And I did take her to visit, and I said, I'll just keep her a little bit longer, and actually I was able to keep her all the time until I adopted her. But I took her out of the orphanage when she was 4 months old, and her adoption didn't go through until just before she was 2 years old. So it was a lengthy, hard process, and there were lots of loops to go through. But God provided, and right at the end, the final loop was the finance. There had been fees along the way to pay, but the final fee was the orphanage fee of $3,000. And when I went there, I had saved $1,500, because my salary at the time was about £70 a month, which we needed to live on. But God had provided, various gifts, and I had saved up $1,500 and went to sign the paperwork, which is when you then have to hand over the money, with 1,500 instead of 3,000, and just praying and trusting God. And when they asked for the money, just before I signed, they asked for the money, and they asked for $1,500. They didn't ask for the 3,000. They asked for 1,500. And again, it's just amazing God. When I shared with a particular friend about adopting, that God had called me to adopt, this friend had said, "Are you sure it's just one?" And I had known then it wasn't just one, that it was going to be more, because I didn't know how. And over the years, what time do you want me to stop? Soon, yeah, sorry, yeah. So over the years, God has done amazing things, and he has led me to adopt six children. So, and Tori is my youngest. And so the final two, the last two of the children are both special needs. And since we've come back, there've been lots of challenges, and one of the big challenges that we've had this last few years actually, has been, the next one up is also blind. So she's 14, and she's totally blind, and she's a little bit, maybe a little bit on the autistic spectrum, and she's really, really struggled at school. Particularly with friendships. So I would encourage you, young people at school, if you've got people around you who are a bit challenged, it's a hard thing at school, isn't it? And I know it's really hard just for the young people themselves, because to find your place and to fit in with your friendship group and whatnot. But there are children. My daughter, 14, she's so friendly. She loves to be friends with people. She'll talk to anybody, and she just wants friends, and nobody will be her friend at school because she's different. And so, but the school thinks the school have thought, oh, she's fine, everything's going well academically. But emotionally, it's been a real challenge for her. Academically, it's a challenge as well, but the school didn't recognise it. So I've been praying about what to do about that, and really wanted to try her at a school for the blind. But the nearest school for the blind is in Worcester. So it's like 3.5 hours away, and yes, I can't afford that. So I've needed to ask for provision for that, and for the school needs to release them, or needs to put it on the EHCP plan that they need some added provision. So the school wasn't in a place to do that for a long time, and then it's just a few months ago actually that the school has realised, and again, I think that's a good thing. God has moved their hearts to recognise that she needs this, and amazingly, she's going to start after Easter at this school for the blind, which is I see that as a great God provision. So anyway, I guess my message today really is don't be afraid of the challenge. And you young people, don't be afraid of the challenges. There's a lot of mess and chaos in life these days, and but God is a God of love, and He's a God that can be trusted. He is faithful. He is true, and He might not move the challenges from us, but he will see us through, and he will bring us through to victory in him. And he always has his plans and purposes for what he allows us to go through. So I hope that's been... Views and Tori's been very good. She's so thank you for listening, and God bless.